What's going on, guys? Rybombie Teacher Nows, and I'm here with my next episode of What If I Was in a Gen series. Today we're looking at Generation 2, and we're looking at the Johto region. This one actually proved to be a nightmare for me because, honestly, the role that I picked as well as the team were very difficult. But let's talk about what changed from Generation 1 to Generation 2. So, Gen 2, we had two new types in. We had the Dark type and the Steel type. The Dark type was primarily built in to nerf the Psychic type, and the Steel type was there to give some extra love to the Fighting type, because Fighting in Gen 1 was actually kind of lackluster. But yes, aside from that, we had genders in this time round, so you could actually breed for Pokemon. We had the introduction and the early introduction of held items, which is something that we haven't had before. But the held items themselves, aside from leftovers, which is still usable today, then when a lot of the early items were just simply items that buffed a move's type's power, or it was like a berry, something like that. There were some specific items like the Thick Club for Marowak and the Stick for Farfetch'd and stuff like that that were also added into the game, but these were not very prevalent as these Pokemon were not known to be very strong and competitive back then. So yeah, largely speaking, leftovers was the main choice for items back then. But yeah, in terms of the actual competitive metagame, aside from Alakazam really getting nerfed, there wasn't that much changing. A lot of the base stats for the new Pokemon in Gen 2 were not particularly impressive. Even the fully evolved Pokemon were not that strong. So a lot of Pokemon typically carried over from Generation 1. Pokemon like Exeggutor and Snorlax and Cloyster were all very prevalent. Starmie got slightly nerfed with the Dark typing, but actually still turned out to be very prevalent in this gen. Chansey got an upgrade with Blissey coming in this one, which meant that Blissey kind of became a lot more prevalent than Chansey. No Eviolite meant that Chansey wasn't viable anymore. Snorlax came back, unsurprisingly, but actually gained a couple of new moves that they could use, so definitely an interesting Pokemon and kind of scary nonetheless. But yeah, so let's talk about where we're going to be at and what type we're going to have this time round. So, Generation 2, I think back to Kid Me, and I think back to even me nowadays. The one particular character in the game I was heavily disappointed with was Lance. I felt like with the game being set like 3 years post Generation 1, if Lance was still going to be the champion, he would at least have an upgraded team. And unfortunately, the only upgrade on his team was that the two Dragonairs that were on his team are now Dragonites. They have similar move pools, and the Pokemon themselves, other than that, actually didn't really change at all. So, for me, this felt like such a big missed opportunity, and I feel like it's something that we could have done, and it's happened in so many generations since, where the champion is actually multi-type. It's not the standard, this is my theme team. Now, of course, it happened in Generation 3 with Steven being mostly Steel-type as well, but from Generation 4 onwards, we started seeing multi-type champions. Cynthia, widely recognized as one of the hardest champions in the game, but I feel like it's worth looking at this and thinking, well, how do we make a multi-type team? Now, I said it earlier in the preview, some of these Pokemon are not necessarily top tier competitive-wise back in the early gen, but I feel like a lot of these Pokemon make sense. And the other criticism I had of Lance, actually, originally, is that he actually doesn't use any Generation 2 Pokemon at all. He has 3 Dragonites, an Aerodactyl, a Gyarados, and a Charizard, all of which are Generation 1. So, it kind of was a bit of a letdown in a way, because it's like, well, why are we not having the new Pokemon? Plus the fact that Lance has so many bad weaknesses. He's got 4 ice weaknesses, 3 electric weaknesses, one of those is quad. The 3 of the ice resistances are also, or weaknesses are quad as well. And all of his team is weak to rock, with Charizard being quad weak to it. So it is a really odd champion as it is, even back in Generation 1. But in Generation 2, I kind of felt like they should have done this team a hell of a lot better. So we're going to talk about it, especially as Red came in at the end as like the final boss, and his team was incredibly terrifying. But yeah, let's look at the team I would have brought. You can probably guess the first set based on the stats you see on the screen. But we're actually going to pick Charizard anyway. I know I criticized Lance for having one and it being Generation 1. But if I'm being honest, Charizard is probably the best fire type in this gen aside from maybe Arcanine. And Arcanine didn't have Intimidate this gen because abilities came in the next gen, so Arcanine was not as prevalent in the first 2 gens of competitive. And plus, the only other fire-type Pokemon of any real note is Ninetales and Houndoom. Houndoom is, of course, in Karen's team, so I tried to avoid having 2 members of the Elite Four with the same Pokemon where possible. I think one of the Pokemon on this team may have been on another Elite Four team, but there are some Pokemon on this team that were given to gym leaders, but I've actually took them and made them better. So, yeah. It's going to be interesting. But Charizard running the Belly Drum set, this actually was a very interesting set. It normally runs leftovers, but as this is a champion kind of NPC battle, while I do want it to be difficult, I do want it to be beatable, so I actually avoided the temptation to put leftovers on. So I actually put Charcoal on to make Fire Blast hit that a little bit harder, as Fire Blast actually on this set is not actually buffed by Belly Drum. Belly Drum, of course, maxing your attack for the price of half your HP. Very high risk, very high reward, but if you're not set up against this thing, or if you're not prepared to face this thing will kill you. In this gen, it was a nightmare. Especially even like with Spike support or whatever, anything like that. Fire Blast can 2-shot the Cloyster, which was the major answer to this in a lot of ways. Earthquake and Rock Slide are phenomenal coverage. Stone Edge wasn't in the game yet, so that's something that we look at. This is a very, very standard Charizard set from Gen 2 competitive, aside from leftovers. This thing hits like a truck. It does actually do major damage to Snorlax and things like Blissey, which were major in the format. Fire Blast, of course, beats Exeggutor as well, which can really eat an Earthquake and a Rock Slide unless it's +6, so yeah, this Pokemon is very, very powerful in this gen, and it makes sense that a champion would have it. You know, it's a really, really powerful whole Pokemon in the gen, so let's make sure he has some of the best mons. Next up is gonna be Steelix, probably my favorite Pokemon from Gen 2, if I had to be honest. Maybe one other Pokemon takes that spot, but I really like Steelix. Obviously, Jasmine had it as her ace, but at the end of the day, Jasmine's Steelix set was really kind of bad. Plus, it was very easy to break because by the time you faced Jasmine, you would have had plenty of Pokemon that could answer it. So Steelix was kind of a weird situation, but the Curse set is actually very, very strong, especially with Roar. Roar allows you to phase out your opponent's Pokemon, so they can't set up on you or anything like that. Curse, Earthquake, and Rock Slide. Again, Earthquake, Rock Slide, very, very strong. Very good coverage. It hits pretty much everything, or at least neutral damage. That's why Earthquake and Stone Edge, the Edgequake combo, is very competitively common in a lot of sets. So I decided to run it again. Curse with leftovers makes this thing an incredible physical wall. So you would have to hit this thing on the special side. It is weak to water though, and it is also weak to fire, which are both special moves in this gen because the physical special split did not come until Generation 4. So we still have to deal with all of that. But Steelix is a very fitting Pokemon. It's really bulky and very hard to take down, so you need to actually understand how to play against this thing while this thing's going to hit you with them stab earthquakes. I was debating putting Iron Tail on this thing instead of Roar, but I actually kind of like Roar quite a lot. It does prevent any setup and things like that, which does make this a lot more harder. Like, my opinion of what a champion battle should be is the champion battle should be one of the hardest fights in the game, because this is the champion. This is the final boss of the region that you're trying to conquer. Right? This should be a tough match, and Steelix definitely fits that bill quite a lot. Does also eat those rock type hits and the electric type hits that Charizard doesn't appreciate, so it's actually a very, very nice partner. Makes a lot of sense to have it. So Steelix definitely a very pivotal role on the team. Very hard hitting mon, and very, very terrifying even in this gen. But next up is gonna be Tyranitar, of course. Tyranitar actually should have been on any champions team, in all honesty. Pseudo-legendaries have been associated with champions quite a lot. Steven having Metagross, of course, Cynthia having Garchomp, Lance having Dragonite. So it's not unheard of for the champion to have the pseudo-legendary, and Tyranitar, of course, being this gen's pseudo-legendary, makes it no different, in all honesty. The only thing that was lackluster is the speed, so I gave it the Quick Claw, just so it can may hit first every once in a while, which can really annoy people who are not ready for it. Rock Slide and Pursuit are very, very strong stabs. A lot of things don't really want to sit in on Tyranitar, so Pursuit is a very, very scary move in this gen. Thunderbolt and Fire Blast provides the much needed coverage, especially against the water and grass types that Tyranitar doesn't appreciate. Fire Blast getting a burn on the fighting types, which I'm quite weak to. with Tyranitar definitely makes a lot of sense as well. Of course, fighting being the problem for both Steelix and Tyranitar is actually patched up nicely by Charizard, so that's something to bear in mind. But yeah, this set is designed to hit on both sides. That 95 special attack is nothing to be sneezed at. 95 is still not bad. Of course, 134 on that physical attack looks an awful lot more appealing, which is why Rock Slide and Pursuit do a lot of damage. But yeah, nonetheless, Mixed T-Tar, definitely a little uncommon, but it was actually very popular and competitive. Typically, Fire Blast was often used, and Thunderbolt was kind of a secondary. There was Ice Beam as well, and various other moves that you can give Tyranitar, but this is a very solid set. It does hit pretty hard. It's not the most optimal set in the world. You might want leftovers on it anyway, because you can eat most hits because of its defensive stats. You might want Earthquake on there for a bit more damage output, but you know, given the fact I've had Rock Slide and Earthquake on a lot of Pokemon already, I kind of wanted to just to keep the stabs. Plus, this Dark typing is also very nice because it does provide a Psychic immunity. Plus, I think, in general, if you are the champion of the region, you should have the new types. Steelix, of course, being the Steel type, and Tyranitar being the Dark type, very much embodies that, so that definitely makes a lot of sense. But, aside from Charizard, we kind of have a bit of a fighting weakness. So, the next Pokemon I actually picked dealt with that very nicely, and that's Espeon. I still think its shiny is terrible. I don't really like it, but you know what? It is what it is. So Espeon back in this gen was never really that strong. It was never the best Pokemon in the world, largely due to the fact it didn't get the best move pool. Not having access to Calm Mind or anything like that, Nasty Plot in this gen, because those moves didn't exist, they came in later. Growth was the only way Espeon could ever set up, and that only gave you +1 in special attack. Back then, of course, nowadays Growth gives you +1 attack and special attack. It's commonly used by grass Pokemon like Venusaur and stuff like that. But yeah, Espeon didn't really get the best move pool in the world. It was typically known for Growth Baton Passing, but I decided to run him offensive. With the Twisted Spoon, Psychic actually hits a hell of a lot. Hits a lot of damage, especially with that 130 special attack stat. Definitely a terrifying special mon. We didn't have the best special offense on this team, but Espeon really starts packing that punch. Growth Psychic, Hidden Power Fire, mostly there for Steel types, because Steel actually resists Psychic, so that's something to bear in mind. Also gives me a way to hit the Dark types. And Morning Sun gives me a bit of recovery. That was basically the idea behind that set, was to kind of be hard, but if you had a Dark type, this would be relatively easy. But yeah, Dark types are relatively handled okay by things like Steelix. But I still have a bit of a problem with Dark types on this team, so I do need to be a little careful. But we will patch that up with the next Pokemon. Because these last two Pokemon I kind of had a hard time picking a team for, because there was a lot of Pokemon that I was considering, but most of them were Generation 1, and a lot of competitive staples. Like I was considering putting Cloyster on this team, I was considering putting things like Snorlax on this team, and Blissey coming back, replacing Chansey, of course. I was looking at those and I thought, you know what, I kind of want to stick to Generation 2 as much as possible and keep Charizard as the only Gen 1. So I decided to go with two Pokemon that apply the same strategy really, really well, and that is Restork. So the first one is a shout out to my good friend Huddle Penguin. I added Heracross onto the team. I actually really like this Pokemon because it does actually answer Dark types very, very nicely with that Mega Horn. Umbreon really does not take this, and Umbreon is the staple Dark type, aside from Tyranitar. So Rest, Sleep Talk, Mega Horn, and Seismic Toss, holding Silver Powder. So Silver Powder buffs up Bug type moves. So Mega Horn just hits like a truck so long as it hits. It is 85% accurate though, so it's not the best accuracy in the world. But you know, Rest, Sleep Talk was always obnoxious. Meant that you couldn't status it. Which could definitely cause a problem. It recovers Sleep Talk. Yes, the RNG could hit Rest, but Seismic Toss was pretty much the only fighting type move it got that was any good. Reversal was pretty much its other move, and its other fighting move was Rock Smash. Did get Counter, but Counter is so unreliable, even in this generation, so it's not really worth picking Counter. So Seismic Toss was kind of the best option that I had to go with for fighting moves. It didn't really get the best move pool in this gen. It got more moves later on, so this kind of set was probably the only set you ever see for Heracross. But yeah, Rest Talk with decent enough bulk. Not the best bulk in the world, but decent. Definitely meant that this thing could put in work. It was definitely the Dark type answer on my team, and I needed that because Dark was relatively prevalent. And last but by no means least, we are going to look at Kingdra. Of course, I know Claire had this, and it was Claire's ace. I fully understand that. But you know what? I needed a water type on this team. I couldn't fit fire, water, grass on. There wasn't really a good grass type in this generation. Like, the only grass Pokemon that really came in were like Meganium, Blossom, and Sunflora. So like, there's not really any grass type Pokemon that I'm not interested in. Not going for Exeggutor, so I decided to go with Kingdra. Kingdra actually is not that great in this generation. Yes, it's got a very good array of stats, but its move pool was completely lackluster. Like, it doesn't get much outside of water and ice moves, and its best dragon move is Dragon Breath. Like, it's not very strong. But nonetheless, it is a Rest Talk user with very, very solid bulk. It's got very good stats to use with it. Added the Scope Lens for the Hydro Pump and the Blizzard, giving me extra crit chance. That's why this thing can be very scary. Crit mons are always terrifying. But nonetheless, Hydro Pump, Blizzard, just there to do a lot of damage. Rest, Sleep, Talk, pretty much there to keep me healthy. With the stats that this thing has, it can actually take hits relatively well. With especially even things like Thunderbolts from Raikou, which was kind of the premier electric type in this gen. Jolteon kind of fell off a little bit. But yeah, generally speaking, I like this team a lot, but I feel like there's some holes in this team, but I can't really patch them because a lot of the Pokemon I'd love to use actually were not very good in this gen. Pokemon like Azumarill and Scizor and these kind of Pokemon were not really that good in this gen. Funny enough, this was probably the only generation that Fortress was probably better than Steelix, but I like Steelix more, so I opted for Steelix instead. But yeah, either way, that's going to be the team. Let me know what you think about this team. Let me know what you would have picked. Definitely interested to see how you would change this team, what you would like to do with it. But yeah, either way, that's going to be it from this video. Now I've got to figure out what I want to do for Gen 3. But yeah, I'm going to get on out of here, so thank you so much for watching. My name is Ryan, Teacher. I'm your coach of the Roll Bomber from Mummies. Stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.